Hello, I'm Gwen Watson and I'm reading Book 1 of the Chestnut Tree Tales, The Rainbow Snowstorm. Once upon a time, in fact just the other day, there lived a little kid whose name was Elray. She was a bit of a pickle, kind of a tyke, the burping sort you can't help but like. In Elray's back garden was an old chestnut tree, a big nutty tree like old trees can be, and Elray had waited for ages to grow big enough to climb up that tree from below. But growing goes slowly when you're only small and you're wishing and waiting to one day be tall. And of course when you get there and you are big and tall and you're up in that tree, there's a chance you might fall. But Elray was fearless and Elray was tough. She knew she would reach that first branch soon enough. So she went every day to that old chestnut tree, and she stretched, and she reached, and she jumped like a flea. One day she was jumping, and she heard a shout, the tiniest shout, shouting, "Oi, help me out!" Elray looked up above, and she looked all around, but the tiny voice owner was nowhere to be found. "Oi!" it kept yelling. "Can't you see? Do you mind? Get me out of this web if you'd be so kind." And then Elray saw it, a thing in the tree, a crispy old thing like a pod for a pea. And in that old thing, in that old chestnut tree, was a grub in a web, yelling, "Oi, set me free!" "Ask nicely," said Elray, "and I'll set you free if you tell me your name and help me climb this tree." "All right, the name's Jones," said the grub gruffly. "Now if you please get me out, we can conquer this tree." So Elray untangled the grumpy old grub and said, "Well then, what are you? Some kind of weird bug?" "A bug? If you please, would you listen to her? How very dare you? I'm a caterpillar." "Oh, don't get offended. I only asked. And now you owe me a tree-climbing class." "It'll take more than one class to turn a squirt like you into a tree climber. So here's what we'll do. The summer is long and we'll train every day. But you'll have to work hard and do as I say." So Elray and Jones, they trained every day, for the tree-climbing challenge was now underway. And Jones called it work, but it felt more like play, 'cause Elray loved being with her mate all the day. One day, Elray ran to the tree to find Jones, but he wasn't there. Elray was alone. She looked high and low for that old grumpy grub, who was all gruff and cross like a grouchy old bug. Then Elray looked up, and a leaf it fell down off that old chestnut tree, all the way to the ground. Elray saw the skies darken, and she felt the cold. Autumn was here, and her tree had turned gold. "Elray!" called her granny. "I smell a storm. Winter is coming. It's time to keep warm." It was winter for ages, I mean days and days. So Elray played inside, by the warm fire's blaze. But she worried for Jones as she snugged in her rug, by her granny's warm fire, like a snuggly bug. She hoped that he'd found somewhere cosy and warm to hide from the windy, rainy old storm. She looked out the window at that old chestnut tree, who stood just as a strong tree can be. She watched its leaves fall one and all to the ground and pile at the bottom in a big leafy mound. And she wished she could go outside and play in the wet and the cold and train anyway. Then one day She looked out of the window and spied a green leafy shoot on the tree, all alive. And the next day the sun got himself out of bed.
"Well, waggle my wellies, spring's here,"
Elray said. She zoomed down the garden to that old chestnut tree, who was there just as always, as trees tend to be. And she looked at its branch, the one nearest the ground, and she sized herself up next to it, pound for pound. Elray stood at the bottom and did her warm-up, just like she'd been taught by that grumpy old grub. She stretched both her arms, made a grab for the tree. The branch, it was hers, in her hands, finally. She scrabbled and swung till she sat atop that big chestnut tree, then looked down at the drop.
"I'm so glad I'm up here," the brave Elray said. "But how to get down without breaking my head?"
She considered the facts while she surveyed the view. Up was quite far, and down was now too. She wished more than ever that Jonesy was there. He'd know how to sort out this sorry affair.
"It's not that I'm scared," shouted out Elray's shout. "But Jones, if you're there, oi, help me out."
Just then she saw it, a big butterfly, all flitting and flapping with her way up high.
"Oi!"
yelled out Elray.
"Have you seen my mate Jones? He's a grumpy old grub full of moaning and groans."
"Oi!"
it snapped back and looked her dead in the eye.
"I'm not a grub. I'm a butterfly."
And Elray, she felt it right down in her bones. As she looked in his eyes, she knew it was Jones.
"I told you," he said as he perched on the tree, "if you trained really hard, you'd be up here with me. 'Cause when winter comes, things get ready to grow. And then in the spring, we can go, 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 go!"
With that, Jones took off and left Elray there.
"Oi, Jones, you come back. I can't fly. It's not fair."
Elray was left there for what felt like forever, a whole minute or two. How could Jones have left her? Just then she heard it. A big roaring whoosh came up behind her with a flap and a swoosh. And Elray she turned, and Elray she saw a great rainbow snowstorm of colours galore. All of the butterflies in the whole world came down in a cloud, and around her they swirled. And they settled upon her and lifted her up off that old chestnut tree that she'd climbed to the top.
"Jonesy, I'm flying! Wee, look at me! Climbing up was so hard, but coming down is easy."
When Elray was safe and back on the ground, the butterflies vanished with that whooshingy sound. So just Jones remained perched on her shoulder, and in his biggest small voice, this is what he told her.
"Remember when winter is boring and cold? That's when we're dreaming. Big, fresh, bright and bold. Keep reaching and striving and setting new aims. Never ever stop dreaming or making up games."
With that, Jones took off and flew out of sight, all multicoloured and big, bold and bright. And Elray looked up at the leaves and the sky and that old chestnut tree where she'd learned how to fly. The end. If you enjoyed the Rainbow Snowstorm, don't forget to buy the book, which is available now. £1 from every copy sold goes to Chestnut Tree House. And keep an eye out for book 2, The Flappity Happening, coming soon.